Before America had a name, it already had eyes, not human eyes. Not yet. The eyes of the forest, watching footsteps. The eyes of the river, remembering voices. The eyes of the sky, witnessing what would come. This is the story of the moment when the land itself became aware it was no longer alone. When the familiar rhythm of seasons, of hunts, of ceremonies older than memory began to shift. When something unknown appeared on the horizon and the land felt it first. The year is 1492. But our story does not begin with ships. It begins inland, far from any coast, in a place we now call the Mississippian Valley, a region stretching from what is today Illinois down to Louisiana, along the great river the Ojibwe would later name Mississippi, the father of waters. Here, a civilization had risen, flourished, and left behind traces so monumental that later settlers would refuse to believe indigenous hands had built them. Cahokia. At its height, around the year 1050, this city held as many as 20,000 people, larger than London, larger than Paris, a sprawling urban center organized around massive earthen mounds, some rising 10 stories high, aligned with the movements of the sun and stars. By 1492, Cahokia itself had been abandoned for nearly 2 centuries. Climate shifts, political fractures, resource depletion. The city emptied, but its people did not disappear. They dispersed into surrounding communities, carrying with them the knowledge of their ancestors. But the land remembered. The mounds still stood. The plazas still echoed. The burial sites still held the bones of leaders and artisans, traders and warriors. The network of pathways that once carried shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, mica from the Appalachians, those routes remained, traced into the earth like veins. And across this land, hundreds of distinct nations continued to live, trade, govern, adapt. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy in the Northeast, bound by laws of consensus and council. The Ancestral Puebloans in the Southwest, building multi-story stone dwellings into cliffsides. The Chumash along the Pacific, navigating ocean waters in plank canoes and mapping the stars. They did not know each other by the same names we use today. They knew themselves by their own languages, their own stories, their own relationships to the places they called home. But the land knew them all. It knew the rhythm of their footsteps, the smoke from their fires, the sound of their songs carried on the wind. And then, one day, the rhythm changed. Imagine you're standing on the shore of what will one day be called the Caribbean. The year is still 1492. October. You have lived here all your life. Your ancestors have lived here longer than anyone can count. You know the shape of every island, the name of every reef, the path of every storm. And then you see them. 3 shapes on the horizon. Not canoes, not anything you recognize. Floating structures, larger than any vessel you have seen, with fabric stretched above them, catching wind like the wings of enormous birds. You do not run, not yet. Curiosity pulls you closer. When the strangers step onto the sand, you notice their skin first, pale, unfamiliar. They wear heavy cloth and metal that glints in the sun. They speak words that have no meaning to you. One of them kneels and presses a wooden object into the ground. 2 pieces crossing each other. Another unfurls a piece of fabric painted with symbols. You do not understand what they are doing, but the land does. Because this is not the first time outsiders have arrived. Nordic sailors had touched the northern coast centuries earlier, briefly, before retreating. But this is different. These strangers do not leave. They plant their symbols. They take your people aboard their floating structures. They write things down in markings you cannot read. And when they sail away, they carry with them not just goods, but knowledge, maps, coordinates, proof that this land exists. Word spreads, not among your people, not yet. You do not know that across an ocean, in courts and councils you have never heard of, men are already planning return voyages, already imagining what can be claimed, converted, extracted. You do not know that within a generation, your population will collapse, that diseases you have no name for, smallpox, measles, influenza, will sweep through your villages faster than any war. You do not know that your children's children will grow up in a world where the old stories are forbidden, the old language is punished, the old ways buried under new names, new borders, new faiths. But the land knows. It feels the shift, the first tremor of something irreversible, heavier. Here is the part we rarely talk about. By 1600, roughly a century after first contact, the indigenous population of the Americas had declined by an estimated 90%. 90%, not from conquest alone, though there was conquest. Not from war alone, though there was war. But from disease, invisible, unstoppable, carried by people who did not even know they were weapons. Entire communities disappeared. Leaders died without successors. Knowledge was lost. Languages went silent. By the time sustained European colonization began, much of what had existed in 1491 was already gone. And what the settlers encountered, sparse populations, cleared fields, managed forests, they interpreted as wilderness, as emptiness, as land waiting to be claimed. They did not see the aftermath. They saw opportunity. This misunderstanding was not innocent. It became justification. It allowed entire societies to be reduced to footnotes. It allowed history to be rewritten as if it had only just begun. But the land did not forget. The mounds still stood. The pathways still traced their roots. The bones still rested beneath the soil. And the descendants of those who survived, they remembered too. What we are rarely told is this: indigenous resistance did not end with first contact. It adapted. Across North America, nations formed new alliances, adopted new technologies, developed new strategies. Some negotiated, some fought, some withdrew into territories Europeans could not easily reach. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy influenced early American democratic thought. The Comanche became one of the most powerful military forces on the Great Plains. The Seminole waged guerrilla campaigns in Florida for decades. Resistance took many forms. Not all of them succeeded, but none of them were passive. And today, the descendants of these nations are still here, still governing, still speaking languages that were nearly erased, still practicing ceremonies that were banned, still fighting for recognition, for rights, for land. The story did not end. It continued, and the land carried it forward. Stand anywhere in North America today. A city street, a national park, a suburban backyard. Beneath your feet, there are layers. Bones of people who lived here thousands of years before you. Tools they made, seeds they planted, pathways they walked. The land remembers. It remembers the footsteps of children running through forests that no longer exist. It remembers the songs sung at harvests that will never come again. It remembers the moment when everything changed, when the horizon brought strangers, and the rhythm that had held for millennia began to fracture. But it also remembers survival. Because the land is not just a record of what was lost, it is a record of what endured. The language is still spoken, the stories still told. The people still here, still connected to places their ancestors knew by different names. History did not begin with discovery. It began long before it was named. And the land, silent, patient, eternal, has been watching all along. Before America had a name, it already had a memory, and that memory is still here, waiting for those willing to listen. If this story changed how you see the ground beneath your feet, then walk with us deeper into the forgotten past. Subscribe to Before America, where history begins before the name and the land remembers what we've been taught to forget.